It was a quiet evening. Ben sat on his couch, sipping a cup of coffee while scrolling through his phone. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the world felt peaceful. He enjoyed nights like these, calm, simple, predictable. Then came the knock. Ben frowned. It was late. He wasn't expecting anyone. He placed his coffee on the table and stood up. Another knock followed, soft but insistent. Curious and a little cautious, he walked to the door and opened it. A young woman stood there. At first glance, she looked human, tall, slender, with deep green eyes that almost seemed to glow. Her skin was smooth, a shade lighter than bronze, and her silver-white hair flowed past her shoulders. She wore a dark blue outfit, simple yet strange, as if it didn't belong to this world. Ben blinked. He had never seen anyone like her before, and yet there was something familiar about the way she looked at him. She smiled. "Ben," she said softly, "I finally found you." Ben hesitated. Do I know you?" The woman tilted her head slightly, as if confused by his question. "Yes," she answered. "I came to see you." Ben narrowed his eyes. "I think you have the wrong house." She shook her head. "No, this is your home, and you are Ben." His fingers tightened around the door handle. This was getting weird. He glanced at the street, wondering if someone was playing a prank on him. But there was no one else around, just the woman standing in front of him, waiting patiently. Ben sighed. "Look, I don't know who you are, but—" "My name is Lyra," she interrupted, "and you do know me." Ben opened his mouth to protest but stopped. The way she said it, so certain, so calm, made him pause. There was no desperation in her voice, no sign that she was lying or joking. She truly believed that they had met before, but they hadn't. "I don't understand," Ben said. "We've never met." Lyra's expression softened. "You don't remember," she murmured, more to herself than to him. A sudden chill ran down Ben's spine. Something about the way she spoke, the sadness in her eyes. It unsettled him. "Maybe you should leave," he said, stepping back. "I don't know what this is about, but—" "Please," Lyra said, taking a step forward. "Let me explain." Ben hesitated. Every logical part of him screamed to close the door, to end this strange conversation, but his curiosity held him in place. There was something about her, something that made it hard to turn away. He let out a slow breath. "All right," he said. 5 minutes. That's all." Lyra smiled, a mix of relief and gratitude. "Thank you." Ben stepped aside, and she walked in. As he closed the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. Ben led Lyra into his living room, keeping a cautious distance. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? How did she know him? And why did she look at him like they had shared something important? Lyra walked slowly, her emerald green eyes scanning the room as if she recognized it. She paused by a shelf, running her fingers over the books. "It's just like before," she murmured. Ben crossed his arms. "Before what?" She turned to face him. "Before the timeline changed." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Timeline?" He let out a small laugh. "Look, I don't know what kind of game this is, but I think you have the wrong person. I don't know you, and I don't believe in—" "You love the stars," Lyra interrupted. "You wanted to see them up close, to explore beyond this world." Ben froze. His childhood dream, the one he had buried long ago when life took a different path. Lyra took a step closer. "You always kept a notebook filled with sketches of planets and ships. You used to sit by your window at night, watching the sky, wondering what was out there." His heart pounded. "How do you know that?" "You told me." Ben stared at her. This was impossible. He had never shared that with anyone, not even his closest friends. Lyra sighed. "I know this is hard to believe, but I need you to listen." Ben hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Go on." Lyra sat on the couch, her posture relaxed, but her expression serious. "We met before, Ben. in another version of reality. Ben shook his head. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't, if you think time is simple, Lyra said. But time isn't a straight line. Sometimes it bends, splits, and even breaks. Ben rubbed his temples. You're saying we were friends in another timeline? She hesitated. More than friends. Ben stared. His stomach felt uneasy. No, that's not possible. I would remember something like that. Lyra looked down at her hands. Not if those memories were erased when the timeline shifted. Ben sat down across from her, struggling to process her words. So, what happened? Why did the timeline change? Lyra exhaled slowly. Something interfered. I don't know the cause yet, but I do know that the life we shared, it was real. And when the shift happened, I was the only one who remembered. Ben watched her carefully. She wasn't acting like a liar. Her voice was steady, her eyes full of emotions she wasn't faking. And the way she spoke to him, it was as if she truly knew him. All right, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. Let's say I believe you for a second. Why are you here? Lyra met his gaze. Because I had to find you. Because even though this world has changed, you are still Ben. And you're still important. Ben swallowed hard. He didn't understand it all, but one thing was clear. This woman believed every word she was saying. And the scariest part, somewhere deep inside, a part of him wanted to believe her too. Ben sat in silence, staring at Lyra. His mind struggled to make sense of everything she had said. Another timeline, a different version of reality. It all sounded impossible. And yet, deep inside, something about her words felt familiar. He leaned forward, rubbing his hands together. So let me get this straight. You and I knew each other in another reality, but something changed, and now I don't remember any of it. Lyra nodded. That's right. Ben shook his head. That doesn't explain how you're here. If the timeline changed, then shouldn't you have forgotten too? Lyra hesitated for a moment. I'm not like you, Ben. I'm not human. Ben's breath caught in his throat. He had suspected she wasn't from Earth. Her strange appearance, the way she spoke, but hearing her say it out loud sent a chill down his spine. He forced a laugh. Okay. So, what are you then? Some kind of alien. Lyra smiled softly. Yes. Ben ran a hand through his hair. This was insane. Completely insane. A woman he had never seen before showed up at his house, claiming to know him from another reality. And now she was saying she wasn't even human. I know it's hard to believe, Lyra said, her voice gentle. But it's the truth. Ben exhaled. All right. Let's assume you're telling the truth. Why do I have no memory of this other reality? Lyra's expression darkened. Because when the timeline changed, it erased the version of you that I knew. This version of you, the one sitting here right now, was never supposed to meet me. Ben frowned. Then how do you remember? Lyra's gaze grew distant. My people are different. We don't experience time the same way humans do. When the shift happened, I retained my memories of what we had before. Ben leaned back, trying to absorb her words. And what exactly did we have before? Lyra hesitated. We were close. Partners. Ben's chest tightened. He had expected her to say friends, but this was something else entirely. He shook his head. That can't be true. Lyra sighed. I know it's difficult to accept, but I remember everything, Ben. I remember the way you laughed when you saw the stars through my ship's window for the first time. I remember the stories you used to tell me about your childhood, about how you always dreamed of seeing the universe. And I remember the way you looked at me. Ben's hands felt cold. He wanted to say she was lying, that this was all some elaborate trick. But the way she spoke, the emotion in her voice, it felt too real. Why are you here? He asked again, his voice quieter this time. Lyra's green eyes locked onto his. Because something is wrong. The timeline wasn't supposed to change. The world you're living in now, It's incomplete. And if we don't fix it, everything we lost will be gone forever. A heavy silence filled the room. Ben swallowed. And what if I don't want to fix it? Lyra's expression didn't change. Then this version of reality will continue. You'll go on with your life, never knowing what was taken from you. And I'll have to leave. Ben felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't understand why, but the thought of Lyra walking away, disappearing from his life, made him uneasy. He took a deep breath. You're asking me to believe in something I can't even remember. I know. And if I help you, what happens to me? Lyra's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. You might remember, she finally said, or you might not, but the universe will be right again. Ben looked down at his hands. This was too much, too fast, too unbelievable. But deep inside, there was a whisper, a feeling he couldn't ignore. Somewhere, in another reality, had he really known her? Had they really stood side by side, looking at the stars together? Ben looked up at Lyra. What do I have to do? Ben's question lingered in the air. His heartbeat felt unsteady as he looked at Lyra, waiting for her answer. She studied him for a moment, then reached into the small pouch strapped to her waist. Slowly, carefully, she pulled out a small silver device that fit neatly in the palm of her hand. It had no visible buttons, no wires, just a smooth surface that shimmered under the soft light of the room. This will help, Lyra said, holding it out to him. Ben hesitated. What is it? It's a memory stabilizer, she explained. It won't bring back everything at once, but it will show you glimpses of what you've lost. Ben stared at the device, unsure. And if I don't want to remember? Lyra's expression softened. Then nothing will happen. Your mind will block it out. But if some part of you still holds on to our past, even without knowing it, then the memories will return. Ben swallowed. The idea of forgotten memories being forced into his mind scared him. But at the same time, he needed to know. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. As soon as he made contact, a sudden wave of dizziness hit him. His breath caught. The world around him flickered, just for a second. And then, images flooded his mind. A vast sky stretched before him, but it wasn't Earth's sky. It was deep purple, with twin moons hanging low on the horizon. He stood on a metallic platform, the surface cool beneath his feet. In the distance, a spaceship towered above him, sleek, silver, unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. Beside him stood Lyra, smiling. She wasn't a stranger. She was someone he trusted, someone he cared for. Her voice was soft. You're finally here. Ben gasped and pulled his hand away from the device. His head felt light, as if he had just woken from a dream that wasn't quite his own. He stared at Lyra, breathing hard. What was that? Lyra watched him carefully. A memory, she said. A real one. Ben shook his head. His mind couldn't process it. That wasn't real. That was just some kind of trick. Lyra sighed. You felt it, didn't you? The familiarity, the emotion. That wasn't a dream, Ben. That was your past. Ben stood up, running a hand through his hair. His pulse raced. He had seen something impossible, something that shouldn't exist in his mind. But it had felt so real. The cool air, the alien sky. Lyra's voice. It wasn't just an image. It was an experience. And the strangest part, it didn't feel like something new. It felt like something he had simply forgotten. Lyra stood as well. I know this is overwhelming, she said gently. But now you understand. The life you remember isn't the only one you've lived. Ben turned to face her. And you're saying that timeline was erased? She nodded. Yes, but it wasn't supposed to be. Ben frowned. Then how did it happen? Lyra hesitated. I don't know for sure. But I do know that if we don't fix it, the instability will spread. This world, Your world will start to break. Ben crossed his arms. You mean reality itself? Lyra nodded. Yes. Ben let out a shaky breath. It was too much to take in. A lost timeline. A life he didn't remember. A universe on the verge of collapse. And somehow he was at the center of it all. He turned back to Lyra. You said this device only shows glimpses. If I keep using it, will I remember everything? Lyra hesitated. It's possible, but there's no guarantee. Some memories might come back. Others might be lost forever. Ben looked down at the silver device still resting in her hands. He had a choice. He could walk away, pretend none of this ever happened, and continue his normal life. Or he could step into the unknown, chase the truth, and find out who he really was. His fingers twitched. Somewhere deep inside, he already knew the answer. Taking a deep breath, Ben reached out and grabbed the device once more. Show me everything. Ben gripped the silver device tightly, his heart pounding. The first memory had shaken him, but he needed more. He had to know the truth, who he was, who Lyra was to him, and why reality itself had changed. Lyra hesitated for a moment, then gave him a small nod. Are you sure? Ben swallowed. Yes. She pressed a small indentation on the device, and instantly, a rush of energy pulsed through Ben's mind. His vision blurred, and the world around him faded. He was standing inside a spaceship. The walls were sleek and curved, glowing with faint blue lights. The floor beneath him hummed with energy. Through the wide window in front of him, space stretched endlessly, filled with stars brighter than he had ever seen on Earth. He turned his head and saw Lyra beside him. She looked different. Her silver-white hair was pulled back, and she wore a form-fitting uniform, smooth and metallic. But her green eyes were the same, filled with warmth as she smiled at him. Ben felt something in his chest, a sense of belonging. This place, this moment, it felt right. You were nervous the first time you left Earth, Lyra said, her voice gentle. But you told me it was the best decision you ever made. Ben took a shaky breath. He could feel it. This wasn't just a vision. It was real. It had happened. Then the memory shifted. He was now in a different place, a strange planet with a golden sky. Towering structures, smooth and glowing, rose around him. He stood at the center of a large gathering of beings, some humanoid, others completely alien. Lyra was beside him, speaking to a council of elder-looking figures. This is Ben, she said, her voice filled with pride. A human, the first of his kind to step beyond his world and join us. Ben felt a rush of emotions, excitement, curiosity, fear. He had represented Earth among the stars. He had stood beside Lyra, not just as a friend, but as a partner. Then, suddenly, darkness. A powerful force pulled at him, like the universe itself was unraveling. Lyra reached for him, her eyes wide with panic. Ben, no, stay with me. But he was slipping away. The last thing he heard was her voice, calling his name. Ben gasped as he snapped back to the present. He was back in his living room, breathing hard. The device in his hands was warm, as if it had just carried him across time itself. He looked up at Lyra, his vision unfocused. I saw it, he whispered. I was there. Lyra knelt beside him. You remember? Ben pressed his fingers to his forehead. The memories weren't complete, but the emotions were real. He had lived another life, a life that had been taken from him. He exhaled shakily. What happened to me? Lyra's expression darkened, the timeline fractured. Something changed history and pulled you away from it. You were never meant to forget. But when reality shifted, you became trapped in this version of the world, one where you never left Earth, never met me. Ben felt his stomach turn. So, my whole life here, it's not real. Lyra shook her head. It is real, but it's incomplete. You are meant for more, Ben, and if we don't fix the timeline soon, Everything we once had will be lost forever. Ben sat back, his mind spinning. The memories, the emotions, the truth, it was all too much. But one thing was clear now. This life, the one he had always known, was only half the story. And if he wanted to reclaim the rest, he had to make a choice. Ben sat in silence, his mind spinning. The memories had shaken him to his core. He had seen the stars, walked on distant worlds, and stood beside Lyra as an explorer, as a part of something much bigger than himself. And yet here he was, in a life where none of that had happened. A version of reality where he had never left Earth. He looked up at Lyra, his voice quiet but firm. "How do we fix this?" Lyra's expression was serious. "It won't be easy. The shift that erased your past wasn't natural. It was caused by something. Or someone." Ben frowned. "Someone changed reality." Lyra nodded. "Yes, and I think I know who." Ben felt a chill run through him. "Who?" Lyra hesitated before speaking. "There is a race known as the Varen. They are not like my people. They do not seek knowledge. They seek control. And they have the technology to manipulate time itself." Ben's jaw tightened. "Why would they change my timeline? What do they gain from that?" Lyra exhaled. "Because you were important, Ben. More important than you realize." Ben shook his head. "That doesn't make sense. I was just a guy who wanted to see the stars." Lyra gave him a small, sad smile. "And that's exactly why you were dangerous to them." Ben frowned. "I don't understand." Lyra stood and began pacing. "The Varen saw the future you were meant to have. You weren't just going to explore the stars. You were going to change them. You were going to be the first human to stand as an equal among other species, to prove that Earth was ready to join the greater universe. Your presence alone was enough to inspire others to follow, to make humanity reach further than ever before." Ben stared at her, and the Varen didn't want that. "No," Lyra said, her voice bitter. "They believe in keeping other species isolated, weak. They erased your journey so that Earth would remain alone." Ben clenched his fists. "So they erased my life, my memories, just to stop humanity from moving forward." Lyra nodded. "They rewrote time to make sure you never left Earth. And it worked." Ben took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. His entire life had been manipulated. His dreams, his choices, they had been stolen from him. But now he had a chance to fight back. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice steady. Lyra looked at him with determination. "We find the point where the timeline was altered, and we set it right." Ben nodded. "How?" Lyra reached into her pouch again and pulled out a second device, larger than the memory stabilizer, with a circular core that pulsed with faint white light. "This is a temporal beacon," she explained. "It can locate the exact moment when your past was erased. If we activate it, we can find the break in time." Ben narrowed his eyes. "And once we find it..." Lyra took a deep breath. "We step through it." Ben's heart pounded. "You mean, we go back?" "Yes," Lyra said. "We return to the moment before the shift. We stop the Varen before they change history." Ben exhaled. It was a lot to take in. But deep inside, he already knew his answer. He had spent his life wondering what was beyond the sky, longing for something more. Now he had a chance to reclaim the life that had been taken from him. He looked at Lyra, his expression determined. "Let's do it." Lyra gave him a small smile, her green eyes shining with hope. "Then we leave now." She pressed the device, and in an instant, the room around them disappeared into a swirl of light. They were stepping into the unknown. But for the first time, Ben felt like he was finally heading home. A blinding light surrounded Ben and Lyra as the temporal beacon activated. For a moment, Ben felt weightless, like he was floating in a sea of energy. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. Ben gasped as his feet touched solid ground. He blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of his surroundings. They were no longer in his living room. Instead, they stood inside a massive metallic chamber filled with strange, floating symbols glowing faintly in the air. "This is it," Lyra said, scanning the room. "We're at the point where the timeline was changed." Ben swallowed hard. The place felt wrong, like the air itself was unstable. He looked at Lyra. "Where are the Varen?" Lyra's sharp eyes moved across the chamber. "They'll be here soon. If we stop them before they complete the shift, we can restore your true past." Ben clenched his fists. He had lost everything: his memories, his future, the life he was meant to live. But now he had a chance to take it back. He wasn't going to let the Varen erase him again. A deep hum filled the chamber, and suddenly, a section of the wall shimmered. From the distortion, 3 tall figures emerged. The Varen. They were humanoid, but their skin had a strange metallic sheen, as if they were sculpted from liquid metal. Their eyes glowed faintly, cold and calculating. One of them stepped forward. "You should not be here." Its voice was smooth, emotionless. Lyra took a step forward, her expression firm. "You should not have interfered with time." The Varen tilted its head slightly. "Time is a tool, to be shaped as we see fit." Ben narrowed his eyes. "You erased my life. You took away my memories, my choices. You were a disruption," the Varen said simply. "Humanity was not meant to leave its world so soon. You would have led them beyond their place. That could not be allowed." Anger burned in Ben's chest. "You don't get to decide that." The Varen regarded him with an unreadable expression. "It is already done. This reality has settled. You cannot change it." Lyra held up the temporal beacon. "We can, and we will." The Varen's gaze flickered to the device, and for the first time, its expression shifted. "That is forbidden technology." Lyra smirked. "Then you shouldn't have left it where I could steal it." The Varen stepped forward, reaching out its hand. "Give it to me." "No," Ben said firmly. The Varen's glowing eyes narrowed. "Then you leave us no choice." The air around them shimmered, and suddenly, the Varen moved. They were fast, too fast. But Lyra was ready. She pressed a button on the beacon, and a pulse of white energy burst outward. The Varen staggered, their forms flickering. Ben didn't hesitate. He ran forward and grabbed the nearest Varen, yanking it away from the beacon. The alien's metallic skin was ice cold, and as soon as Ben touched it, he felt a strange, disorienting pull, like his body was being stretched in different directions. Lyra shouted something, but Ben barely heard her. He focused on the beacon, watching as it emitted another pulse of light. The walls around them flickered, as if reality itself was shifting. The Varen struggled, but Ben held on. He gritted his teeth, pushing forward. "You won't take my life again." The beacon glowed brighter, brighter, until everything around them dissolved into pure light. Ben gasped, his eyes snapping open. He was somewhere new, somewhere familiar. The air smelled different, cleaner, fresher. A soft hum filled the space around him. He turned his head and saw Lyra standing beside him. They were on a spaceship. Ben's heart pounded. He knew this place. He had been here before. He looked down at himself. He wasn't wearing his old clothes anymore. Instead, he wore the same uniform from his visions, smooth, metallic, designed for space travel. He sucked in a breath. The timeline had changed back. "Ben." Lyra's voice was gentle. He turned to her. "I remember." A slow smile spread across Lyra's face. "Then we did it." Ben exhaled, his chest feeling lighter than it had in a long time. He looked out of the wide ship window. The stars stretched before him, endless and brilliant. He wasn't trapped anymore. He was exactly where he was meant to be. And this time, nothing would take that away from him. The end.